I want to hear about Gosnell. I've read over and over that the screenplay had to be compromised repeatedly. I think I heard Dean Cain actually talking about that on Fox, just to be able to even get that into production.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about that for us?
Sure. First you have to understand that a screenwriter in a movie is kind of the lowest man on the totem pole. The director and the producers have a lot more power. So that's something you get used to, and you either direct your own films or you just understand that that's the way it is. I have quit many movies so as not to write things that I didn't believe in. But that was not the situation here. So Gosnell happened because I saw that two people I knew were making the film, right? They were making this film about this abortionist serial killer, and the key to the story was that his trial went uncovered by the press. Why? Because they didn't want people to get the idea that abortion was killing, right? And so they just didn't cover the story. Biggest serial killer in American history, uncovered, empty, So they started raising money for it on one of those, fundraising things. And I called them up and I said, it's too bad you don't know like an award-winning mystery writer who would love to do this picture, And they were like, oh yeah, you're hired, That was our conversation. I was like, because I thought gee, they didn't even think of me, and they hired me on the spot, and it was a painful project to work on. Michael Ramirez, I don't know if you know him, he's a double Pulitzer Prize-winning political cartoonist who had done a cartoon of the babies killed by Gosnell as Holocaust victims behind the fence, and he sent it to me. He sent me a print of it, and I hung it up over my wall as I was writing it, and was deeply aware of the responsibility I had to them in writing the story. And I had nightmares almost every night, it was tough. It was a tough story. And our brief, by the way, it's not a gory movie. I purposely went out of my way to write it as a mystery story, as a kind of Law and Order type mystery story. But I did, I did include a character who represented the press. And we did get into kind of a squabble over that, because they had the feeling that I disagreed with, that if they made the movie well enough, the press would like it, even though it disagreed with it. And I knew that would never happen. And so they didn't want to stick it to the press. And I wanted to stick it to the press until, like killing a vampire. That's how I wanted to stick it in the press. And they probably did the right thing. To be honest with you, I think that they kept it, they had very little money, so they kept it centered on the trial thing, which was the thing they could afford. And it was not a bitter situation, it was not screaming and yelling at each other, but I was sorry not to jam the press, because I thought the press was the story. I thought that was the story. I thought the story, almost more than anything, was the press, and the fact that the press has reached a point now where if they can't make the story fit with their narrative, they won't tell the story. And I was pretty passionate about that, but again, it wasn't an angry thing. We all knew we were doing something. We all knew we were out there, in the first place. We'd gone out as far as you can go into the water with that film. We weren't, because the reason was because we weren't necessarily appealing to a Christian audience, like the one that they just made, Unplanned, or whatever that was called. That appealed to that audience. This didn't, because it had bloodshed and murder and evil in it. But I thought there was some really good stuff in it that remained in it. A lot of the stuff that came out of it came out of the trial transcripts. My favorite scene in the movie, which is, I condensed it for the screen, but it was right there in the trial transcript, was when they brought in the good abortionist to explain what a good abortion is like. And it was exactly like what the guy was doing, And that was it was one of those things that was written for me. I wish I could take, it's a brilliant scene, I wish I could take credit for it, but it was reality. And some of the stuff just about Gosnell and the actor who played Gosnell was so good. And so it really, for what it was, for what we were working with, which was 2 cents, and a ball of string, it came out pretty well, I thought.
One of the things that I love about Andrew Breitbart was that he was able to bring people together, and he was a great unifier of conservatives, and I really like that about him. It seems like that's what we need now again, and one of the most important things, I think, is to push back on the big tech companies who are censoring all of the conservatives now, especially on YouTube and elsewhere. And I guess one of the things I'd like to know is who could unify people to come together and actually come up with a unified idea or a unified way to push back. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right. I wish the president would get more on this. I think it is a major deal. I do not believe that social media should be allowed to censor people. Social media is governed as a platform, not as a publisher. A platform is like the phone company. So it's as if you and I were talking on the phone, and the phone company came on and said, you can't continue this conversation because we don't like what you're saying, okay? A publisher gets to curate what they publish, right? A publisher can say, I'm only publishing liberal stuff. But the difference is a publisher's liable for what they print, right? So if a publisher prints something libelous about you, you can sue them, okay? So if they're gonna act as a publisher, we should be able to sue them every time somebody lies about us on Facebook. I would be the richest human being on the planet, okay? So I think the government should really get into this. I think Ted Cruz should get into it. I think all these guys should get into it because I'm a First Amendment purist. I want everybody to have a chance to speak. I don't want to silence anybody. And I'm not afraid of the haters. I know the haters are there. The haters are real, but I'm not afraid of them. We can take them. We can take them out. I mean, we can take them out with good arguments over their bad arguments. And nobody wants to live like that. And people who live like that are miserable, unhappy people. So it's easy to sell not hating people. But I think that's got to be stopped. There's no question about it. One, by hook or by crook, and I think we need lawyers to do it. I mean, it's like, but the question of unification is a really good one too, and I'm a little heart sore about it, to be honest with you. I loved Breitbart. I remember the day Breitbart died, I was sitting in an airport waiting room at like 5 in the morning, and the thought that went through my head when I heard the news, and we all knew, he lived, it was insane. I mean, the guy, I remember he had a heart attack and called me from his hospital bed and started screaming about some political thing, and I was like, Andrew, stop, So we all knew it was going to come, and it did come, and the first thought that went through my head is, oh, maybe God's not on our side, because I was just so devastated by it. He had an amazing generosity. He really did. He would just say, oh, you got to meet this guy. You got to meet him. He can help you out. You want somebody? Oh, he can do that. And it was so un-Hollywood, where everybody's always protecting their goods and all this stuff. That it was just a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful thing. He had no money. He never had any money until the very end. So he couldn't pay us. So one of the things would happen, he would discover talent, and then people who had money would hire us away. And he would say to me, like, why don't you write for me? And I would say, because you don't pay me, I'm a professional writer, that's what I do. But he was just so generous and so unifying, and you're right. We got a real serious problem with this right now. Trump is part of it, but Trump has only revealed the schism. He didn't cause it. When Trump first started running, I was appalled. And one of the most popular videos I ever did was attacking Trump. I think it got 17 million hits. I wish I could get it back now, because I think he's done a terrific job. I mean, he was not at all what I thought he was going to be. And he's an annoying human being, like incredibly annoying, but he's done a good job. There's just no question about it. When I went in and told Ben Shapiro that I was voting for him, I said, it's a binary choice. It's Hillary Clinton, who's a career criminal, and Trump, who might be a criminal, but might be okay, Ben yelled at me for something like 3 hours, And the way Ben talks, it was like that machine gun scene in The Godfather where they killed the guy outside. But I said to him, dude, you're a smart guy, but I'm older and wiser than you are, and there's only 2 people running, and one of them's going to win, And that rift, I mean, between Ben and me, it's fine. We're pals, But that rift in the party has not healed. And too many people who do what we do are careerists. I didn't mean, this part of my life has come to me as a complete surprise. When I tell you all I ever wanted to do was write novels, it's all I ever wanted to do, you know? The idea that I'm recognized on the street now has taken me completely by surprise. I mean, I'm shocked. I was not what I intended at all. I never intended to be in front of a camera. I don't do this for me. I actually don't. I do it because I'm dead serious. I think the country is in danger of losing its freedoms. And I love this country so much, and I love our freedom so much. And to be perfectly honest with you, though it sounds sentimental, I love our God so much that I'm dead serious about what I'm doing. I don't care if you're a libertarian or you're a Trump guy or an anti-Trump guy. I don't care. I don't care. As long as you fight, as long as you got that American flag going for you, you know, I'm with you. And I think that's the way more of us should be. But it's not. People are fighting their corner. People are not thinking ahead. And it's a serious, serious problem. You know, Trump doesn't help. He can be like a pain in the neck sometimes, and I think everybody feels this. If he could just like dial it back just a little bit, but maybe he wouldn't win if he did that. I don't know. You know, I mean, he's a unique character, and he's certainly an American character. There's nothing like anomalous about him. He's a typical crazy. You know, this is a nutty country. You know, and it's like, but you're right. You're right. We have this. I don't want to blame it on selfishness. I just think that people aren't thinking in terms, you know, when you're an artist, you put everything into the object, you know. It's not my ego, it's my ego is in the object. We got to put more of our ego into the country. We got to put more of our ego into the Constitution and less of our ego into, oh, you know, I've got this many hits and this many, you know, followers and all that stuff. But I don't know what to tell you because I'm heartsore about it. I think we really do need to hang together, follow Reagan's 11th commandment, which was, you shall not attack your fellow Republican. We'll see. I don't know whether people catch on or not. Yeah.
I remember one of my fondest memories in my life came about a year ago when I was driving 5 Catholic friends down to a bachelor party, and we decided, well, we had a long drive, and we said, let's put on some Klavan. So we listened to your podcast, and it was a mailbag, and somebody asked you something about the Catholic Church, and I don't remember the details of the question or your answer, but I remember distinctly that the admiration and perspicacity with which you spoke of the Catholic Church left 5 guys in my pickup truck in a speechless wonder. I think about 2 of us had tears in our eyes, and we all said to ourselves, he's almost there. And
You guys are so annoying, you Catholics.
I know. So that's my question. Were we right? And if not, why not?
Well, there are reasons. I mean, I'm an Anglo-Catholic. I mean, I go to Knowles comes to my church because it's more Catholic than his church, which is Catholic. You know, I think we're doing the liturgy from 960 A.D. I think is what, you know, it really is an old-fashioned church. But I do have problems with the Catholic Church, and they have to do. I mean, so many of my friends are Catholic, so I get this speech I get people beating up on me about this all the time. That's why I'm kidding you. But it has to do with the top-down aspect of it. I think that that I am a Protestant to the degree that I believe in the inner light, and I believe that the inner light trumps everything. You know, that if I am reading Scripture, if I'm praying, if I'm listening to the experts, and the experts to me are guys like Pope Benedict. I mean, he was the best theologian of my lifetime. I read every word that came out of his pen. You know, I was like, I just thought he was unbelievably great. You know, but if I'm doing all that, and I come to a conclusion that is different than the teaching of the church, I will go with my conclusion. And I think as long as I feel that way, I feel a little bit hogtied about it. Yeah, that's basically what it comes down to. It's like somebody, a Catholic friend said to me, it's not that you disagree, it's that you want the right to disagree. And I think that may be a fair way of putting it. Yeah.
You know, I've been called a hater and a bigot in the Twitter sphere, and I've had my Instagram account shut down and my content pulled for being offensive. But my beef is sometimes with the conservatives, the gatekeepers. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I produce 6, 7 films. I can't break into the conservative world because it's the Ben Shapiro's and the National Review and the now defunct Weekly. I mean, they were the gatekeepers. And how do you compete with those top-down people, popes, that tell us this is what we're all going to talk about, and we're going to, manage the conversation and direct it? That's my beef.
Yeah, no, it's a good beef. I want to make some excuses for them, okay? The problem that we have is that we don't have the mechanism to bring the culture up where it should be. So if you make a documentary and I'm sympathetic with it at all, even if I disagree with some of it, and it makes it onto Netflix, you will come on my show. I will hunt you down, if I can get you. But I can't get you on Netflix. And so when people come to me, and they come to me every single day, will you read my book? Will you watch my... I can't do it. I don't have the time, and I'm not sure whether I'd be able to help them if I did, I'm not in that, none of us is in that position. And so we want to help, but we have to help at that next level. You somehow have to get to that place where we can say to people, oh, you can see this on Netflix. You can see it on Amazon. I don't know what to tell you except that we are swamped by people. I look out for good cultural stuff all the time. Most of the time, I can't get people to come on because they're afraid I'll end their career just by being seen with me. And Ben has that problem too. There are a lot of big celebrities who love Ben, and he tells them, don't come on my show. I would never do that. I would say, come on my show, end your career. I just think we have to have the courage to face these people down. I don't worry about it because I don't respect, I said this to Ben on the air once. I got so annoyed. I said, I'm not going to be judged by the killers of babies. I'm just not, so it's like, I don't have the respect to anything they can take away from me is not worth having, basically. But look, I get it. I do, there's so many people. You have to understand there's so many people, and they have to get to a certain level before we can start to plug them and support them. I was telling Linda, I think, that I started out doing a cultural show. That was going to be my gig. Ben was going to do politics, and I was going to do culture. No one would listen to it. No one would listen to the culture. And so, on the right. So I had to do politics and just kind of slip in a little culture from here and there. Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of Sidney Powell and License to Lie, but I've been reading it, and you were talking about we need to get the lawyers involved. If you haven't read that book, you might want to take a look at it because it's quite shocking, some of the shenanigans that have been going on to actually corrupt the legal process. So I'm wondering, if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Well, the legal process has obviously been corrupted because of some of the judgments that are coming down just to get at Trump. Just to sort of, hamstring him in terms of immigration and things like this. Our last president was as corrupt as any president we've ever had, in my opinion. He wasn't corrupt. He wasn't what they call money corrupt. At least in New York, we used to call it money corrupt. A lot of guys aren't. He was power corrupt. He ran the federal government like a Chicago city machine. He used the IRS to silence the opposition. He used the FBI to spy on his opponents. He used the State Department to cover up malfeasance in Libya and in Benghazi and at the border, in Fast and Furious. He was a corrupt guy. The judges that he appointed, why do you think Mitch McConnell has done one thing? He's just said, I'm going to appoint judges. Why do you think he did that? Because he knows the kind of judges that Obama put in place. The legal system has been corrupted. Our journalistic system has been corrupted. It's bad. It's a bad thing. I still think we can beat them. I still think we can take them. It's funny. They say that, I can't remember who said it, maybe Mark Twain, that a lie will travel around the world before the truth gets its pants on. Once the truth gets its pants on, it kind of kicks ass, So I think, I still think we can win, yeah.
In today's Hollywood that is dominated by the liberals and the liberalism, how do you, as a evil white male who is conservative, survive? And second question is, how many of you are there in Hollywood? 2, 3?
Say that, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
How many of you are there in Hollywood? We know Clint Eastwood. Who else?
They're more than we think, but not enough, you know. I mean, why show up if they're, you know, I mean, I always compare it to black baseball managers, you know. Once they said there should be black baseball managers, they couldn't find any. And I once heard a guy say on the air, well, maybe black people just don't have what it takes to be managers. And I thought, you told them for 50 years they couldn't be managers. Why would they come, you know? So they don't show up. Now, some of the great managers are black managers because now they're welcome. So the same thing is true in Hollywood. Conservatives aren't welcome, so they don't go there. They go into other businesses. You know, I haven't really survived. I mean, I had, because it was never the center of my life, it doesn't break my heart to have lost that income. You know, I'm not happy about it, but it doesn't break my heart. But it's very hard for me to get hired. I mean, people still talk to me because, if I may say so, I'm very good at what I do, and they read stories and they say, oh, you know, we want this, you know, this is something we want. And then they find out a little bit more about me and they don't want to, you know, they don't want to hire me. But on the other side of that is this. The monopoly of big companies over stories has been broken. That's why it's so important to beat them on social media, because that's where we live, you know. I meet college student after college student who says, oh, I changed my mind because of you, because of Ben, because of Jordan Peterson, because of, you know, Dave Rubin, people that they saw on YouTube. There are now new ways to tell stories. I put my new novel up as a podcast before I sold it as a novel. It's been one of my biggest sellers as a podcast because nobody could stop me, right? They can not publish me, but they can't stop me from putting it up as a podcast. So there are all kinds of ways to fight back. I mean, it's kind of like the American Revolution. You know, they've got these armies of the night in great big rows, and we're popping up out of behind the trees and popping them, you know. That's what it's like. And I've utilized everything I know how. I go on, you know, listen, most of my resume today is stuff that didn't exist 10 years ago, okay? And again, I only wanted to write novels. That's all I ever wanted to do. So podcasts, YouTube, you know, movies that you put up online yourself, novels that you publish on Amazon, Kindle yourself, all kinds of ways to break the monopoly, and we should use every single one of them. You know, it's hard. It's hard. It's nothing easier in the world than going up to Paramount Pictures and saying, would you buy my story? And they say yes, and they put it out with a big star in it, and you know people are going to show up. Even a movie that bombs gets millions of views, you know. But it can be done, and all the new technology is there. And what I tell people, what I tell young conservatives who want to get in the business is go to the bigs, but don't sell your soul to get to them. And don't forget to do all the independent stuff you can do, you know? Because again, this is a revolution. This is a revolution. They've owned the culture for 50 years. This is not a new thing. They've owned the culture for 50 years. This is a revolution. And it's got to be fought like a guerrilla war. And that's what we're doing. And I think we're doing pretty well, you know, overall. But we could use some big guns now, I think.
I'm just wondering your thought on if a story has to be forced into a narrowly defined ideology, does that stifle creativity? Secondly, related to that, that's what's going on in this country. I'm wondering about your thoughts of film in other countries, because I often find foreign films are more typically have everyday people, an everyday situation. It's not so glamorous, but it's much more engaging. It engages the mind much more.
Yeah, no, they do have a talent for that. I mean, the French have this incredible well of gorgeous women who look like real people, which we don't seem to have. You know, our movie actresses don't look like anybody real. You know, it's like, but the French movies, you sit and they watch. Where do they find these people? You know, Europe is kind of lost as a culture. I'm not sure it's coming back, and so I wouldn't like envy them. But let me answer your first question first, which is, does it impinge on your creativity? Sure it does. Sure it does. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen the 1990s show NYPD Blue. NYPD Blue features a cop who's a bigot. He's a racist. And he's the second star, but he's the whole show. I mean, and the show traces his conversion to Christianity. That's what the show's about, right? Every day he's dealing with the ugliest kind of murders. I mean, ugly sex crimes, all kinds of the worst kind of New York, real true New York City police stories. And he's a racist, and sometimes you don't like him, you know? But slowly he starts to realize that there's more to life than he thought there was, and he starts to come around, and it's a very, very moving story. You couldn't write that character today, a sympathetic racist. You just couldn't do it, you know? And so, of course, it kills the movies. Look, nobody goes to the movies anymore. I mean, except for the Marvel comics things, the movies aren't very powerful. TV is powerful. Streaming is powerful. And if it becomes politically correct, it'll die too. I mean, that's, you know, the reason it had this second golden age is because people snuck in. Because basically, guys like The Sopranos, they said, you're not going to make any money anyway. Do whatever you want. And that's why it was so good for a while. And you know, but now there's so much money in it. Who knows what will happen to it? But still. But of course it does. Of course it gets in the way of your creativity. I mean, you want to tell the story of the world. That's what artists are here for. And the world is full of bad people who do good things and good people who do bad things and bad things that work out well and, you know, good things that work out badly. And if you can't tell those stories, you can't be an artist. You can't create art in the end, you know. So the argument that I always get is that during the days of the Hayes Office, which was the golden age of movies, like 1939 to about 1950, they had all these restrictions on movies. But the whole game was getting around those restrictions to tell the real story. I mean, I had to see Casablanca 3 times before I realized it was about an act of adultery. You know, that was like, you know, they hid it in there, but they got it in, you know. And that's what made those movies so great, was the tension between the restrictions and the way they got the story. But yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal. And it certainly turned the cinematic landscape into a wasteland. And it will turn TV into a wasteland again if it becomes that strong. So,
how do you find the boundary? I mean, you're sadly, you know, a known quantity. But I mean, how do other people try to find the boundaries of where the Overton window is nowadays?
You can't. They do it on purpose. They're doing it on purpose to make you think twice. I mean, even if they get you to think twice, they've won. You know, and that's why they're doing it. I mean. You know, I put out a tweet today, Alyssa Milano declared a sex strike. Yeah. So I said that's like a feminist sex strike is like a Hollywood writer's strike. The people who go on strike weren't working that much to begin with. And I thought, you know, they may knock me off of that, but, you know, again, there's nothing they can take away from me that's worth having. So, but they do it on purpose. They do it. There's no question. Yeah.
Andrew, what do you see as perhaps the best avenues or vehicles for conservative philanthropists in healing the culture?
Well, I mean, I think that there are a lot of them, but I would like to see more philanthropists turn to the culture instead of politics. I mean, there'll always be money for politics. There's always going to be people to raise money for politics. But we need a cultural infrastructure, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be popular. It needs to reach people who are not being reached. You know, it doesn't. How can I put this? Like, there are no women's magazines where women can go and read about what women want to read about and not get leftist cant. Not one. There's not one. There's one online, I think, called Evie. But like, you know, there's no NPR for people like me who just want to hear how an artist made something. You know, without hearing about how great socialism is, you know. There's some of the Catholic radio stations occasionally deal with things, but they tend to have a narrow focus. They want to keep it within the Catholic idea, which is, I get that, that's a genre, but like, I would just like to see, like, I would have any artist on my show. I might challenge him, but I would never yell at him, you know. I would have any artist on my show. They won't come on. The leftist artists won't come on. I do think we need a film fund and somebody to run it who knows what he's doing, right? And I do think we need a distribution network like some of the Christian movies have. But failing that, I think we need an infrastructure of reviews, grants, awards, reviews, coverage for the culture. And it should be debated. We should have debates. I know conservatives who think, gay marriage is the end of the world. I know plenty of conservatives who don't care at all. Let's talk about it, Let's hear both sides. Let's not sell anybody anything, This is the way cultural people work. They talk, they debate, they think, they reason, they say, they go down wrong paths, they come back and do it. That's the way sophisticated people think. They are not being served by any conservative or Christian outlet. The Christians are better at this than the conservatives. There's a place like First Things, good magazine. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about, But I think we need it so much in so many different places. A writer who goes out and makes Gosnell should think that, Nick Searcy won an award, a director's award, from a pro-life organization. But he should have won he took no money and made a film. He should have won an award from a film place, There's nobody to do that. And I'm embarrassed to explain this to people because it's so true. Artists work for love. That's what they're there for. They want to be loved. They want you to love their stuff. I don't care what you think of me. I don't. But I want people to love my stuff.
My question is, with all the social media and the banning of people, how do you stop it? Are there other venues?
I think that we should be allowed to sue them for libel and slander if they're going to act like publishers. That'll stop it in a great big hurry. I think that they might have to be broken up in terms of antitrust. And it's easy to say start another one, but it's awfully hard to do because they're so big now. It's like saying start a car company, But I think it is. I think it may take some government action. I hate to say that because I hate government action, but I think it might take some. They are being truly abusive of their power. And look, the left used to know this. Corporations are power centers. They can get so big that the only people who can stand up to them are the government.
I respectfully disagree with you about the Christian movies to some extent, because one of the things that I found is that in our family, especially my kids, find them very helpful because they reinforce a lot of their, the things that they learn in church. And it's a positive kind of entertainment that they're not getting through other places. And it always seems like it uplifts everyone and only strengthens the belief in the teachings of Christ. So I think it has a more positive impact than it has a negative impact.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, and I only tease them because they're all there is. I certainly think that families need things that they can all watch together. I've written Christian material. I wrote young adult novels for Thomas Nelson. They are squeaky clean, but they are action stories. There are action adventure stories, but they're squeaky clean. They toe that line. I think the production values are going up. I think I haven't seen Unplanned. I kept getting invited to the screenings, and I was out of town every single time. But I will see it. I hear this one about the kid who falls to the ice is actually quite good. Yeah, breakthrough. They are, but they haven't reached the level. So far the best Christian film is Passion of the Christ. But think how full of bloodshed and, that's an adult movie. And it's a tragic movie, and it's a real movie, and it's, at the end of that movie, I turned to the guy next to me and I said, didn't the book have a happy ending? But at least, that was an artist addressing an important issue. You can't watch that movie without understanding that this is a deep idea, even if you don't believe in it. You can watch God's Not Dead and never think that any deep thought ever passed through a Christian's mind. I shouldn't pick on these things because I do understand that they're pleasant to watch. I simply think you're not going to move the dial on the culture. It is great that Christian families have entertainment they can watch, but to move the dial, you've got to be able to go to things where people say, like, that made me think about this differently. I would not. Who does that? people talk to me that they say, oh, I didn't think God was something you could believe in, and now I do. They say that about Jordan Peterson. They sometimes say it about Ben. That's what you're going for in the arts as well. It's to change the default atheism in our culture. Atheism is the default culture of the sophisticated person in America. Okay? The sophisticated person thinks he doesn't have to believe in God, and that's true on the right as well as the left. And that's what needs to be changed, is those underlying assumptions. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I know I make jokes about it, and I'm a hard ass about it, but I don't disagree with you necessarily. Yeah.
I have to say, I think if you saw Unplanned and Breakthrough, there's a lot of grit and people going back and forth in their faith. So I think that would be, I think that they are much better than we've seen in the past.
They're getting better. They are. Yeah.
And one other thing about the government getting involved with this horrible problem with social media, restricting and getting us completely out of it. I think it's much better idea to your idea of suing. I mean, Catholics don't sue for the most part, but Linwood is suing,
yeah.
And Coventry Catholic Boys are suing, and they're suing major networks.
That's a great suit, by the way. I love that
it's a tremendous way to, maybe with social media, to do that, be successful, would really make them stop and think and maybe change things inside.
To go back to the Christian movie thing, when you were talking, and sometimes some of the other people were talking, I was thinking about the fact that when the novel was first invented, it was these soppy romances, almost all read by women. And then Jane Austen, who was a genius, took those stories and turned them into something absolutely brilliant. So there's always the hope that will happen. It's a genre. It started out kind of soppy. It has gotten better. It may get so, maybe someone will come along who's so good at it that it will elevate it to art. That would be a wonderful thing. That is what happened to the novel. The novel became art after being crappy entertainment. Movies too. They started out as garbage entertainment. They became an art. So it's possible that genre will morph into something much more important than it is right now. Yeah.
Just in response to what you were saying, how truth will kind of trump the day, even if the lie travels more quickly. Perhaps I'm just a pessimistic conservative, but I feel like our children, especially, are being miseducated at such a young age. The exposure they have is so more intense, because of social media, because of what you see just driving down the street, whoever is living down at the end of the court. How do you get truth into a mind that doesn't know how to think anymore, or has been trained not to think?
Yeah, I mean, look, parents have tremendous power. They do. They have more power than they think. And ultimately, your kids will adopt, I shouldn't say that. Ultimately, you will give your children a culture, but it can be destroyed from the outside. We were talking over dinner about the power of social media and the power of technology, and I haven't quite figured this out yet because I love technology and I love the internet and I love social media because it makes people free. It means that I have gotten around. I mean, there's a lot of people who would have absolutely destroyed my career who haven't been able to because I keep ducking them by using the new technology. And so I have a lot of fondness for the technology. But I do understand that for children, it's a problem. And, the problem about talking about children is they're always different. They're different than adults, so the things that can be available to them. I will tell you this, okay? I just got back from Hillsdale where I was teaching. I had a fellowship for like a week and a half. And almost everyone there, like almost everybody at the Daily Wire, was homeschooled. And they are the sanest, happiest, best educated people I know. I mean, every single one of them. So I hate the educational system. I think it's really a terrible thing that we're doing to children. I think we are depriving them of their heritage and depriving them of their God and depriving them of a true education. So it may be that we have to do more of it ourselves. Easy for me to say, my kids are grown, but still, I think that may be the only answer. And if we do it ourselves, ultimately they'll have to come around and do it with us,
On the subject of Christian movies and Christian art in the mainstream culture, for my money, the best Christian filmmaker, the best filmmaker that's quote unquote on our team, actually is doing so as masked. I would call that Christopher Nolan. I mean, Nolan's making great movies that everybody's seeing, and they are, if you know what to look for, almost overtly Christian and conservative. So I'm wondering, either just as somebody in the audience of his films or as a super secret Hollywood insider, what can you tell us, and what is your opinion of the Nolan movies?
Well, one of the most popular pieces I ever wrote, aside from my attack on Trump, was a piece in the Wall Street Journal pointing out that The Dark Knight was about George W. Bush. It was the #1 piece on the, I handed it to my wife, who always reads my stuff first, and she said, they're going to kill you. They will literally kill you. And I said, why? It's about a Batman movie. Who cares, you know? It was the #1 piece on the internet. I got an email every 3 seconds, all day long. They were so angry at me, but it was so obviously true. I mean, even my brother, who's a stone left-winger, called me up and said, I don't know what they're yelling about. They're obviously right, you know. I mean, so he is a deeply, I mean, those Dark Knight pictures are the most conservative films I ever saw. The one with Bane in it is just an anti-socialist tract, basically. You know, yeah, he's a very powerful filmmaker, very talented filmmaker, is making some really good, interesting stuff. And by the way, there's a lot of that going on. I mean, Cormac McCarthy won't come out, but he's obviously a conservative. The Coen brothers seem to be conservatives. Ben and I can't agree on this. He thinks they're nihilists. I think they're slowly becoming Christians without knowing it. Yeah. Hail Caesar is the most conservative picture I ever saw in my life. You know, I can't believe it. You know, the reason I talk about these Christian movies, possibly one of the most important books I ever read was Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, right? I was 19 years old. I was in Berkeley University, right? The relativists and the anti-God people were just coming in to the university, okay? Telling us that morality is relative, that one culture is as good as another culture. I was 19 years old. I didn't know anything about any of this, you know. I read Crime and Punishment, which basically takes on that argument even before Nietzsche thought to make it. You know, Nietzsche hadn't even published anything, and Dostoevsky saw him coming and cut him off at the pass, you know. I didn't know any of that. I just read the novel, and I thought, oh, that's right. He's right. I became a Christian 30 years later because of that book, okay? That book is about an axe murderer who falls in love with a hooker, okay? Go into Crossway's bookstore and say, I'd like the book about the axe murderer who falls in love with a prostitute, and see if they'll sell it to you, okay? It's not there, all right? That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, to reach minds like mine, you have to tell the truth, you know? It's not that there shouldn't be family entertainment. I want everybody to make every movie, you know? I don't want anything, I'm never talking about silencing anybody. I'm just saying that that book, it is the greatest Christian novel ever written, isn't being written today.
Today, in my mind, we're far more material than we were 30, 40 years ago. And isn't that what's happened to us, is that we are primarily concerned with stuff, which makes people more open to socialism, quite frankly. So could you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, I think it's right. I mean, I think socialism is a materialist idea that you can change things by moving the money around. But of course, money is just a symbol of your hard work, of your industry, of your creativity, of your greed. It's a symbol of all kinds of things. And when you move it around, you haven't moved anything around, just paper, you know. So as charity, it works, but as change, it doesn't work at all. And ultimately, you run out of money. You run, as Margaret Thatcher said, you run out of other people's money. But yeah, I think that, you know, I write about this in that City Journal piece, Can We Believe, that we are the victims of a narrative that with the Enlightenment, religion was left behind, that we lived in this dark, you know, the idea of the Middle Ages is a propaganda idea. It was invented just as the Renaissance began. People in the Middle Ages didn't think they were in the middle of anything. They thought they were on the cutting edge of modernity. It was the people who came after who said, oh, that was the middle, you know, the classical world was brilliant, and then there was the middle dark ages, now there's us, and how wonderful we are. And that narrative has captured the imagination. And the idea is that the church kept us all in ignorance, and now we were enlightened, and these things can be left behind. hundreds of years that thing has been in the toaster and it's been working away on the human mind. The idea that God is dead, the idea, Hamlet's indecision comes out of that. Hamlet went to school where Martin Luther nailed up the 95 Theses. That was what that play, that to me is what that play is about. And the problem is, not that there's no truth in that narrative. Obviously, if there was no truth, nobody would believe it. But the problem is that it's ultimately not true twice. It's not true in that some of the greatest thought in the world took place. I mean, Aquinas is one of the great thinkers of the world. That's the first way it's not true. But the second way that it's not true is that the world we thought was coming, which was Newton's clockwork world, turned out to be a lot more mysterious than we thought it was. And now, they used to have this thing called God of the Gaps, which was religious people would say, well, you don't know where this happened, so it must be God, But now we've got science of the gaps, where it's become more and more clear that a world like this just doesn't come into being, It just doesn't happen this way. So they invent these ideas like the multiverse, The multiverse, as I say in this piece, I say the multiverse is that there are a million universes, and this just happens to be the one that looks like it was spoken into being by a gigantic invisible Jew, And so they're now making stuff up to pull their fat out of the fire. That narrative simply needs to be updated. It didn't work. It didn't turn out that everything is clockwork. It doesn't turn out that everything is material. And I think that you're absolutely right. As long as that narrative is the central narrative, the thing that gets me is conservatives conservatives yell at me when I mention God. Why do you have to bring God into it? I did a speech at Hillsdale where I talked about the moral world, and I talked about God in the moral world, and how crazy people get when they leave the moral world behind. And you go on the comments on YouTube, and most of them are very nice and very flattering, but a lot of them are like, why do you have to bring God into it? That's because I thought about it for 50 years, and I couldn't figure out a way to build a moral system without him. That's why. And I don't believe, because I read Crime and Punishment, I don't believe there is no moral system, And so you're right, and conservatives who don't believe in the spiritual world in some sense are just ceding the field to socialism. And socialism is is ceding the field to chaos and destruction. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're on the verge of a Christian rebirth. I listen to the smartest young people I know, and they're gathering together talking about the Gospels. People who have more IQ in their little finger than I have in my entire body. I mean, really smart kids. Their ideas have fallen apart. The idea that there's no such thing as truth, which is a nonsense. I think, is that true? Is it true there's no such thing as truth? Once you ask that question, you realize they're babbling. They're just talking nonsense. These ideas have fallen apart. They've reached the end of the line. And when things fall apart, they generally disappear. That's why they're censoring us. That's why they're cutting us off on YouTube and Twitter, because they haven't got an argument left. And so it doesn't have to be all conservative. I think the left has things to say, and I'm not like I am a partisan, but I'm not. I don't believe that half the country is utterly wrong about everything. That doesn't make any sense to me. But I do think that they're wrong about this. And as long as we don't grasp the first principle, that we are made, that we are created, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain rights, until we grasp that principle, we got nothing. We got no argument. That is the argument.